The mansion in Morecambe stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows dark save for one. In the home gym, where the heavy bag usually swayed with the rhythm of combinations, Tyson Fury sat motionless on a bench, staring at nothing. The WBC heavyweight championship belt that had once adorned his waist now belonged to another man, Oleksandr Usyk, the Ukrainian who had done what many thought impossible. He had solved the puzzle of the Gypsy King. 3 weeks had passed since that night in Saudi Arabia, but Fury could still feel every moment as if it were happening now. The swift movement of Usyk, darting in and out like a phantom. The growing frustration as his usual tactics failed. The shocking moment in the 9th round when Usyk's perfectly timed combination sent him to the canvas for only the 2nd time in his professional career. The final bell, and the unanimous decision that stripped him of his crown. "Dad?" Paris's voice called softly from the doorway. "The kids are asking for you at breakfast." Fury didn't turn. His wife of 15 years knew him better than anyone, had been there through the darkest times of his depression and his triumphant return. But this was different. This wasn't just a loss. It was the shattering of an identity he'd built over decades. "I'll be there in a minute," he mumbled, but didn't move. Paris stepped into the gym, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. "You haven't been to the gym in weeks, Tyson. Sugar Ray Robinson lost. Muhammad Ali lost. Even your hero, Larry Holmes, lost. They didn't lose like this." Fury's voice was barely a whisper. "They didn't get schooled, made to look ordinary." He finally turned to look at her, and Paris felt her heart break at the sight of his eyes, vacant, haunted by something beyond the physical defeat. His phone buzzed again on the bench beside him, probably Shane McGuigan or one of the other trainers trying to reach him. He'd stopped answering calls 3 weeks ago, stopped reading messages, stopped looking at social media where former fans now posted memes about the Gypsy Clown, and how he'd been exposed as a fraud. The morning light was beginning to creep through the windows when Sugar, his oldest daughter, appeared in the doorway. "Daddy, I made you toast," she said, holding out a plate with the same determination her father usually showed in the ring. Something flickered in Fury's eyes, a ghost of his old self. He managed a weak smile and took the plate, though he had no appetite. "Thank you, love." As he forced himself to take a bite, his phone buzzed again. This time, the name that flashed on the screen made him pause. Ricky Hatton. Hatton knew something about losses, about falling from the heights, about the darkness that could swallow a fighter whole. Fury had helped him once, years ago, when the Manchester legend was fighting his own battles with depression. For the first time in weeks, Fury's finger moved toward the answer button. Sometimes, he knew from experience, the hardest punch to throw was the one that started you on the road back. But before he could answer, the call went to voicemail. Fury stared at the phone, his hand trembling slightly. The toast grew cold on the plate as memories of the fight played through his mind again, not just the physical exchanges, but the moment he'd seen something in Usyk's eyes that he'd never seen in an opponent before. Complete certainty. Paris watched her husband, recognizing the war raging behind his eyes. She'd seen him like this before, back in 2015 after he'd beaten Klitschko, and the world should have been at his feet. Instead, he'd spiraled into depression and addiction, his weight ballooning to nearly 400 pounds as he contemplated ending it all. This time was different, though. Back then, he'd been fighting his own demons. Now, he was fighting the whispers of doubt that came not just from within, but from every corner of the boxing world. The same pundits who'd once called him the greatest heavyweight of his generation were now writing retrospectives about how Usyk had exposed his limitations. Sugar climbed onto the bench beside him, her small hand finding his massive one. "Will you teach me to box today, Daddy?" she asked, throwing a playful jab into the air. Fury looked at his daughter, then at the heavy bag hanging silent in the corner. For a moment, Something stirred in his chest. Not the old fire, not yet, but perhaps the first spark that might lead to it. "Not today, love," he said softly. But then he added something he hadn't said in weeks. "Maybe tomorrow." Paris caught the words, and for the first time since the defeat, she felt a glimmer of hope. With Tyson, maybe tomorrow had always been the first step back from the abyss. It wasn't a promise of recovery, but it was an acknowledgement that recovery was possible. As the sun rose fully over Morecambe Bay, Fury finally stood up. His massive frame, still carrying the weight and muscle of a heavyweight champion, cast a long shadow across the gym floor. He walked to the heavy bag and placed a hand on its surface, feeling the familiar leather under his fingers. The phone buzzed again. This time, when Ricky Hatton's name appeared, Tyson Fury took a deep breath and answered the call. It wasn't a step back into the light, not yet. But it was a step away from the darkness. And sometimes, in boxing as in life, that's all you can ask for. The courage to take that first step, even when you're not sure where it will lead. As he listened to Hatton's voice, Fury's eyes drifted to the wall where his WBC belt used to hang. The empty space seemed to mock him, but for the first time since the defeat, he felt something other than despair when he looked at it. He felt the first stirrings of something that had defined his entire career, the desire to prove everyone wrong. Again. The Phoenix Gym in Manchester hadn't changed since Ricky Hatton's glory days. The same worn equipment, the same pictures on the walls, the same smell of leather and sweat and determination. But for Tyson Fury, walking through those doors for the first time in years, everything felt different. No cameras, Hatton had promised. No press. Just you and me, kid. Like the old days. It had been 2 days since that phone call. 2 days of Fury forcing himself to eat properly again, of Paris watching him with cautious hope. Now, in the pre-dawn darkness that fighters know so well, Fury stood in loose-fitting tracksuit bottoms and a hoodie that couldn't quite hide how much weight he'd put on in the weeks since the defeat. "First thing," Hatton said, closing the door behind them, "we're not here to train. We're here to remember why you fell in love with boxing in the first place." Fury nodded, his eyes drawn to a familiar photo on the wall, a younger version of himself sparring with Hatton, both of them gritting despite the intensity of this session. He remembered that day, remembered being a teenager who dreamed of becoming heavyweight champion of the world. "You've been here before," Hatton continued, walking to the center of the ring. "Not just in this gym. You've been in this place, this darkness. After Klitschko, everyone thought you were finished. You proved them wrong. After the drugs, the alcohol, the depression, you proved them wrong again. This is different," Fury muttered, but he followed Hatton to the ring. "I'm 35 now. Maybe they're right. Maybe Usyk exposed me. Maybe nothing." Hatton cut him off. "Get in here." Fury ducked through the ropes, his movement lacking its usual grace. Hatton watched him, seeing not the defeated champion, but the teenager who used to train here, whose self-belief had once seemed unshakable. "Hit me," Hatton said suddenly, holding up his hands. "What?" "You heard me. Show me that famous jab. The one that bamboozled Wilder. The one that kept White at bay. Show me." Fury hesitated, then threw a half-hearted jab that wouldn't have troubled a journeyman, let alone a world champion. "Again," Hatton demanded. "But this time, remember who you are. You're the man who got up from Wilder's right hand. The man who came back from 400 pounds to win the heavyweight championship of the world. The man who got schooled by a cruiserweight." Fury spat, but he threw another jab, this one sharper. "Better. Again." For 10 minutes, they worked just on the jab. By the end, sweat was running down Fury's face, but something had changed in his eyes. The punch wasn't yet what it had been, but there was purpose behind it now. "You know what your problem is?" Haddon asked, lowering his hands. "You're not angry enough." Fury looked at him questioningly. "The old Tyson Fury, the one I knew, he was angry at the world. Angry at anyone who doubted him. Angry at the critics, the doubters, the ones who said he couldn't do it. Where's that anger now?" "I'm tired of being angry," Fury admitted. "Tired of having to prove myself over and over." "Then be tired," Haddon said simply. "Be tired, be defeated, be whatever you need to be. But don't let them write your ending for you." As if on cue, Fury's phone buzzed in his bag at the corner of the ring. Despite his promise to Paris not to look at social media, he found himself reaching for it. A new video was trending. Usyk at a press conference, wearing Fury's old crown, saying he'd exposed the myth of the Gypsy King. Haddon watched as something flickered in Fury's eyes. Not quite the old fire, but perhaps the spark that might ignite it. "You know what the hardest part of coming back is?" Haddon asked quietly. "It's not the training. It's not the diet. It's looking in the mirror and recognizing yourself again." Fury nodded, his eyes still on the phone screen. Then, deliberately, he turned it off and tossed it back in his bag. "Again," he said, raising his hands to Haddon. "Show me that combination you were famous for. The one to the body." For the next hour, they worked. No cameras, no pressure, no expectations. Just two fighters sharing knowledge, remembering what it felt like to love the sport before the weight of championships and expectations had changed everything. As the sun rose over Manchester, Fury sat on the ring apron, his breathing heavy but controlled. Haddon handed him a bottle of water and sat beside him. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Haddon asked. "A broken champion? No. I see what I saw 20 years ago, a fighter who's about to prove everyone wrong. Again." Fury took a long drink, then looked at the old photos on the wall, champions who had fallen and risen, legends who had faced defeat and come back stronger. "Tomorrow," he said finally. "Same time?" Haddon smiled. "I'll be here. But tomorrow we train. Really train." "You ready for that?" Fury stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across the ring. For the first time in weeks, he felt something stirring in his chest. Not confidence, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of defiance. "The world thinks the Gypsy King is finished," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time to remind them why they feared me in the first place." As he walked out of the gym into the morning light, his phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't reach for it. The voices of doubters could wait. Right now, he had more important things to focus on, like the voice in his own head that was finally, after weeks of silence, beginning to roar again. Paris was waiting in the car outside, worry and hope battling in her eyes. She saw something different in his walk, in the set of his shoulders. "How was it?" she asked as he got in. Fury was quiet for a moment, looking back at the gym where he'd first learned to fight, where he was now learning to fight again, not just against opponents, but against the hardest foe any boxer faces, himself. "Call Sugar," he said finally. "Tell her daddy's ready for that boxing lesson he promised." Paris smiled, and for the first time since the defeat, the smile reached her eyes. The road back would be long, she knew, but at least now they were on it. The video went viral within hours. Tyson Fury, the former champion, running along Morecambe Bay at dawn, his massive frame silhouetted against the rising sun. Someone had filmed it from their car, probably expecting to capture more evidence of his decline. Instead, they caught something else. The Gypsy King, hood up, face set in determination, putting in the miles like he had so many times before. "You ready for this?" Haddon asked, watching Fury wrap his hands in the gym later that morning. It had been 6 weeks since their first session, 6 weeks of quiet work away from the cameras. But today was different. Today, the cameras were coming. "Ready or not, it's time," Fury replied, his voice carrying an edge that had been missing since the defeat. He dropped 30 pounds already, and though he wasn't yet in fighting shape, the change was visible, not just in his body, but in his eyes. The gym door opened, and the first reporters filed in. BBC, Sky Sports, ESPN, all the major outlets that had written him off were here to document what they probably expected to be a fallen champion's desperate attempt at relevance. "Tyson! Over here! What do you say to Usyk's comments about you being finished? Any truth to the retirement rumors? Your critics say you've lost your spark. Care to comment?" Fury finished wrapping his hands, taking his time. 6 weeks ago, these questions would have cut deep. Now, he felt something different. Not the old bravado, but something cooler, more focused. "You want to comment?" he said finally, turning to face them. "Watch." For the next hour, he worked with Hatton and his new training team. Not the showy, theatrical training he'd been known for, but real work, combinations on the heavy bag, footwork drills, the fundamentals that had made him champion in the first place. Every punch threw off his newly awakened hunger. Every movement spoke of renewed purpose. During a water break, one of the reporters called out, "Your old trainer says you've lost your mental edge. Says the defeat broke something in you that can't be fixed." Fury wiped his face with a towel, then walked to the ropes. "Let me tell you something about being broken," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gym. "I've been broken before. Proper broken. Not just in the ring, in here." He tapped his temple. "And every time, I came back stronger. You want to know why?" He paused, looking each reporter in the eye. "Because being broken means you get to choose how you put yourself back together." The cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment. But this wasn't the old Fury showmanship. This was something else. Something rawer and more real. Later that afternoon, after the media had gone, Sugar bounced into the gym for her now regular boxing lesson with her father. She'd been coming 3 times a week, learning the basics, watching her father rediscover his own love for the sport through her eyes. "Daddy, I saw you on the internet today," she exclaimed. "Everyone's talking about you again." Fury smiled, helping her put on her tiny boxing gloves. "Are they saying nice things?" "Some are. Some aren't. But Mummy says it doesn't matter what they say, as long as you believe in yourself." Fury glanced at Paris, who was watching from the corner. She smiled back, knowing how far he'd come from those dark days after the defeat. "Your mom's a wise woman," he said, holding up the pads for his daughter. "Now, show me that jab we've been working on." As Sugar threw her punches, Fury felt his phone buzzing in his pocket. He knew without looking that it would be filling up with messages, some supportive, some mocking, all reacting to his public reemergence. But for the first time since the defeat, he felt no urge to look at them. The real work was happening here, in the quiet moments between the headlines. In the pre-dawn runs along the bay, in the grueling sessions with Hatton, in these precious moments teaching his daughter the sport that had given him everything and nearly taken it all away. Later that night, after Sugar had gone to bed, Fury sat in his home gym, looking at the empty space where his belt had hung. He kept it empty deliberately, a reminder of what he'd lost and what he was fighting to reclaim. "They're saying Usyk's looking at other opponents," Paris said, bringing him his evening protein shake. "Says you need to prove you deserve another shot." Fury nodded, taking a long drink. "Good. Good? Yeah. Because this time, it's not about proving anything to him or to them." He gestured toward his phone, toward the world of social media and public opinion that had once seemed so important. "This time, it's about proving something to myself." Paris watched her husband, seeing the change in him. The old Fury would have been on social media by now, calling out Usyk, making bold predictions. This version was different, quieter, more focused, but no less determined. "You're going to shock them all again, aren't you?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Fury stood up, his frame casting a familiar shadow across the gym floor. But this shadow was different now, leaner, hungrier, shaped by purpose rather than pride. "No," he said quietly. "I'm going to shock myself. The rest will follow." Outside, the lights of Morecambe twinkled under a star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, Usyk was probably training, probably thinking he'd seen the last of the Gypsy King. The media was probably already writing their next batch of articles about Fury's desperate comeback attempt. But in this quiet gym, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the fire that was building, not the old wild flames of bravado and showmanship, but something deeper, something that burned with a cold and steady purpose. Tomorrow would bring another dawn run, another session with Hatton, another step on the long road back. But for the first time since the defeat, Tyson Fury knew with absolute certainty that he was on the right path. Not because he needed to prove the doubters wrong, not because he needed to reclaim his belt, but because, finally, he remembered who he was fighting for: himself. The sparring partner was good, young, hungry, fresh from the Commonwealth Games with quick hands, and the kind of confidence that came from never having tasted defeat. He'd been brought in specifically because his style mimicked Usyk's. The fast footwork, the angular movement, the precise combinations. Tyson Fury watched him warming up from across the gym, his own hands already wrapped, his mind clear. 3 months of dedicated training had transformed him. The extra weight was gone, replaced by lean muscle. But the biggest changes weren't physical. "Remember," Hatton said quietly, "this isn't about impressing anyone. This is about learning," Fury finished. "I know." The old Fury would have wanted to dominate the sparring session, to prove a point. This version of him had different priorities. As he stepped through the ropes, he felt none of the familiar urge to perform, to entertain. There was only focus. The bell rang. The young fighter came out fast, just as expected, throwing the kind of combinations that had given Fury trouble against Usyk. But this time, something was different. Fury didn't try to match the speed. Instead, he moved economically, his defense tight, his eyes reading patterns. "Good," Hatton called from the corner. "Read him. Take your time." In the second round, the sparring partner landed a clean combination that once would have triggered Fury's pride, made him swing back wildly. Instead, he nodded slightly, acknowledging the shots, and continued his methodical work. By the fourth round, everything had changed. Fury's timing was perfect, his distance control masterful. The young fighter was still throwing combinations, but now they were hitting air, while Fury's counterpunches landed with increasing precision. "That's it!" Hatton shouted as Fury slipped another combination and landed a perfect right hand. "That's what we've been working on!" After 8 rounds, both men were drenched in sweat, but only one of them had found what they were looking for. As they touched gloves, the young fighter looked at Fury with new understanding in his eyes. "You're different than what I expected," he said quietly. Fury helped him remove his gloves. "Different than what I expected too," he replied. Later, as the gym emptied, Hatton sat with Fury reviewing footage of the session. "You see it?" he asked, pointing to a particular sequence. 3 months ago, you would have tried to prove a point there. Today, you proved something better." Fury nodded, watching himself on the screen. The movement was familiar but different, more efficient, more precise. Less showman, more surgeon. "They've announced Usyk's next fight," Hatton mentioned casually, "against that American prospect. The one everyone's talking about." Fury continued watching the footage, his face unreadable. "Good for them. You're not going to say anything? Make some noise on social media? The old Tyson Fury would have. The old Tyson Fury isn't here anymore. He cut in, but there was no bitterness in his voice. Just certainty. That evening, as he drove home, his phone rang. It was his promoter, Frank Warren. "We've got offers," Warren said without preamble. 3 different opponents, all ranked in the top 10. Any one of them would make a perfect comeback fight. Safe enough to... "No," Fury interrupted. "No, I don't want safe. I want Joyce." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Joe Joyce, the Olympic silver medalist, the undefeated contender who'd been calling Fury out for years. A dangerous fight for anyone, let alone someone coming back from a devastating loss. "Tyson," Warren said carefully, "that's not the smart play. Joyce is too risky. Too big, too strong, too..." "Perfect," Fury finished. "He's perfect." Another pause. "The public will say you're crazy. The odds makers will probably favor him. Your own team might." "Book it," Fury said simply, then hung up. At home, he found Sugar in the garden, practicing her footwork just as he taught her. She stopped when she saw him, running over for a hug. "Did you beat up the new sparring partner, Daddy?" Fury smiled, picking her up. "No, love. I learned from him. But I thought you were supposed to win. Sometimes winning isn't about beating the other person. Sometimes it's about beating who you used to be." That night, after the children were in bed, Paris found him in his study, watching old footage, not of Usyk or Joyce, but of himself. Years of fights, from his earliest professional bouts to his most recent defeat. "Joyce?" she asked simply. "Joyce." She sat beside him, watching his younger self on the screen. "They'll say you're making a mistake, that you should take an easier fight first. They've been saying I'm making mistakes my whole career." He turned to look at her. "But this time, it's different. I'm not fighting Joyce to prove anything to anyone else. I'm fighting him because he's exactly what I need." "And what's that?" "Someone who won't give me a choice. Someone who will force me to be better than I've ever been." He gestured to the screen, where his younger self was celebrating another victory. "Better than that version of me ever was." Paris studied her husband's face, seeing the change that 3 months of quiet, dedicated work had wrought. The old fire was there, but it burned differently now. Not a wild blaze of bravado, but something deeper, more sustainable. "When will they announce it?" "Tomorrow." He smiled slightly. "The boxing world's going to go crazy." "And what are you going to say? When they ask you why Joyce? Why now?" Fury turned back to the screen, watching his past self, remembering who he used to be and knowing, with absolute certainty, who he was becoming. "Nothing," he said quietly. "I'm done talking. It's time to let my actions speak." Outside, the night was clear, the stars visible over Morecambe Bay. Somewhere out there, Joe Joyce was probably already training, probably dreaming of being the man to end the Gypsy King's career once and for all. Let him dream, Fury thought. Let them all dream. Because while they were dreaming, he was building something new. Something that none of them, not Joyce, not Usyk, not even his old self, would be ready for. The Real comeback was just beginning. The O2 Arena hummed with electricity. Outside, London's night sky was alive with searchlights, and inside, 20,000 fans waited in anticipation. In the changing room, Tyson Fury sat alone, his hands already wrapped, his mind quiet. 6 months had passed since the Usyk defeat. 6 months since that morning in his home gym when he'd sat broken and lost. 6 months that had changed everything. "It's time," Hatton said, appearing in the doorway. Fury nodded, standing to his full height. At the final weigh-in, he'd come in at 265 pounds, lean, focused, prepared. Joyce had towered over him at the face-off, 275 pounds of muscle and confidence, promising to end the Gypsy King's career once and for all. Fury hadn't responded to the provocation. Hadn't sung, hadn't taunted, hadn't given the media any of the headlines they craved. His silence had been more unsettling to the boxing world than any of his old antics. "Daddy!" Sugar's voice cut through his thoughts. She ran into the changing room, Paris following close behind. His daughter was wearing a miniature boxing robe, her own hands wrapped just like his. "Remember what you taught me," she said seriously. "Jab, move, don't get hit." Fury knelt down to her level, smiling. "When did you get so wise, love?" "Since you started teaching me proper." She threw a perfect jab into the air. "Now go teach Mr. Joyce." The walk to the ring was different this time. No elaborate costume, no singing, no theatrics. Just Fury, hooded and focused, moving through the crowd like a man with a purpose. The commentators noted the change, wondering aloud if this was a sign of diminished confidence or something else entirely. Joyce was already in the ring, bouncing on his toes, his undefeated record displayed proudly on the big screen. 30 wins, 27 knockouts. A granite chin that had never been dented, power that had broken every man he faced. As the referee called them to the center, Joyce tried to stare Fury down. The old Fury would have turned it into a show. This version simply nodded, eyes clear and focused. The bell rang. Joyce came out exactly as expected, forward, relentless, throwing heavy combinations. The crowd roared, expecting Fury to engage, to give them the kind of war they'd paid to see. Instead, he moved. Not the wild movement of old, but something more precise, more economical. Every step had purpose, every angle created opportunities while denying them to Joyce. "He's running!" someone shouted from the crowd. But he wasn't running. He was reading, learning, adapting. In the third round, Joyce trapped him against the ropes and unleashed a barrage that would have felled most heavyweights. Fury rolled with the punches, his defense tight, his eyes never leaving his opponent. When the assault ended, he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming something to himself. Then everything changed. The Fury that emerged in the fourth round was something the boxing world had never seen. Gone was the wild swinging, the showboating, the unnecessary movement. In its place was pure boxing efficiency. Every punch had purpose, every step set up the next move. Joyce, for the first time in his career, looked confused. His attacks began to lose their conviction as Fury's counters landed with increasing precision. In Fury's corner, Haddon watched with quiet satisfaction. This was what they'd been building toward. Not just a better version of the old Fury, but something entirely new. The end came in the ninth round. Not with a single spectacular punch, but with a systematic breakdown of a great fighter. Joyce, his face marked up, his attacks now uncertain, walked onto a perfectly timed combination that sent him down for the first time in his professional career. He rose at 8, but Fury was already moving, not with wild aggression, but with calculated pressure. Another combination landed. Then another. When Joyce fell again, the referee didn't bother to count. The crowd erupted, but Fury didn't celebrate. He helped Joyce to his feet, embraced him, whispered something in his ear that made the bigger man nod in respect. Only when Sugar came running into the ring, her tiny boxing robe fluttering, did Fury's composure break. He scooped her up in his arms, tears finally flowing freely. "You did it, Daddy. You did what you taught me. We did it, love." He corrected her, looking at Paris, at Haddon, at the team that had helped him rebuild not just his career, but himself. Later that night, after the post-fight press conference, where his measured words had surprised everyone as much as his performance, Fury sat alone in his hotel room. His phone was buzzing with messages, from other fighters, from media, from fans old and new. Among them was one from Usyk. "Ready when you are," it read simply. Fury smiled, but didn't reply. 6 months ago, that message would have consumed him. Now, it was just another step on a journey that had become about something much more important than belts or revenge. The next morning, as dawn broke over London, Fury was in the hotel gym, showing Sugar how to throw a proper hook. "But you won last night, Daddy," she said, confused. "Don't you want to rest?" Fury looked at his daughter, then at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him wasn't the Gypsy King of old, nor was he the broken fighter who had sat in his home gym 6 months ago. He was something else, something new, something better. "This isn't about winning or losing anymore, love," he told her. "It's about becoming who you're meant to be. And that work never stops." Outside, London was waking up to headlines about Fury's resurrection, about his transformation, about what this meant for the heavyweight division. But inside that quiet gym, none of that mattered. What mattered was a father teaching his daughter, a man at peace with himself, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won in the ring at all. The Gypsy King was back. But more importantly, Tyson Fury had found himself again. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere.
Tell us in the comments what part of this story impressed you the most. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the world of incredible events.